and welcome. I'm so glad you're here, settling in, finding a comfortable position in your bed. There is nothing else you need to do now, nowhere else you need to be. The day is done, its responsibilities and its worries can be gently set aside, like a heavy cloak you no longer need to wear. Take a slow, deep breath in, and as you exhale, feel the tension in your shoulders and your neck begin to melt away. Let your body grow heavy, sinking softly into the mattress beneath you. Another deep breath, in and out, letting the quiet of this moment wash over you. Tonight, we're going to travel back in time, not to a world of great battles or loud pronouncements, but to a quieter, more patient world. We are going to visit the land of ancient Egypt, along the fertile banks of the life-giving Nile, and together we will gently explore a question that has fascinated people for millennia. How was a pyramid built? But we will not look for drama or mystery. Instead, we will find comfort in the details, in the slow, rhythmic processes, the daily lives of the people, and the quiet, monumental effort that was guided by the sun, the moon, and the stars. So close your eyes if you feel comfortable doing so. Let your mind drift, and allow the story to unfold. There is no need to follow every word. Just let the sound of my voice be a gentle current, carrying you softly towards a deep and peaceful sleep. Our story begins not with a stone, but with a belief, a deep and profound belief in the journey of the soul after death. For the ancient Egyptians, life on earth was but one part of an eternal existence. They believed that each person had a Ka, a life force, and a Ba, a unique personality, almost like a soul bird. For a pharaoh, a king who was considered a god on earth, it was essential that his Ka and Ba could reunite with his body after death, allowing him to be reborn in the afterlife and take his place among the gods. This reunion required the body to be preserved, which is why they perfected the art of mummification. And it required a safe, eternal home, a tomb that was more than a grave. It was a vessel for eternity, a resurrection machine.
And so, in the mind of a pharaoh, perhaps Khufu, for whom the Great Pyramid was built, the idea of his pyramid was not born of ego alone, but of a deep spiritual necessity. We can imagine him in the cool stone halls of his palace in Memphis, the capital city. The air is scented with incense and lotus flowers. He looks out over the lush green fields nourished by the Nile, and beyond them, to the west, to the land of the setting sun, the land of the dead. There, on a high rocky plateau, his eternal home would rise, a stairway to the heavens, a solid, unshakable mountain of stone that would anchor his soul to the earth while allowing it to ascend to the stars. The planning would have begun years, perhaps even decades, before the first stone was ever cut. It was a quiet, intellectual process, carried out by the most learned men in the kingdom. Scribes, architects, and priests would gather. Imagine a room lit by the soft, flickering glow of oil lamps. They unroll long sheets of papyrus, a thick, pale paper made from the reeds of the Nile. On these sheets, with brushes made of chewed reeds and ink of black soot and red ochre, they would draw. They did not have blueprints as we know them. Their plans were a combination of precise calculations and sacred geometry. They would calculate the angle of the sides with incredible accuracy, an angle that mirrored the rays of the sun god Ra as they burst through the clouds. They would determine the exact orientation of the pyramid, its four sides aligned almost perfectly with the four cardinal directions: north, south, east, and west. This was not for aesthetics. It was to align the structure with the cosmos, with the path of the stars, which they believed were gods journeying across the night sky. The architect, perhaps a high official like Hemionu, Khufu's vizier, would oversee this. He was not just a builder. He was a master of logistics, a quartermaster, an astronomer, and a priest all in one. His work was slow, methodical, and profoundly important. Every line drawn on the papyrus, every calculation made, was a sacred act, a step in preparing the king's path to eternal life.
Before a single worker arrived, the perfect location had to be chosen. The Giza Plateau was not selected by accident. It was ideal. It was high ground, safe from the annual flood of the Nile. But more importantly, it was made of strong, stable limestone bedrock, a solid foundation that could support the unimaginable weight of millions of tons of stone without shifting or sinking. We can picture a team of surveyors arriving at the plateau. The sun is warm on their backs, and a gentle breeze blows in from the river valley below. The land here is not flat. It is rocky and uneven. Their first task, one of the most critical of the entire project, was to create a perfectly level base. They did not have spirit levels or laser transits. They used something far more elemental: water. The workers would first build a low wall of mud bricks around the entire perimeter of the proposed pyramid, creating a shallow, contained area. Then they would cut a grid of narrow trenches into the bedrock across this entire area, like a giant checkerboard. These trenches were all connected, and then they would fill these trenches with water from the Nile, carried up in clay pots. The water, as it always does, would find its own perfect level. The surveyors would then mark this water level on the inside of the trenches. Once the water was drained away, they had a series of perfectly level lines across the entire foundation. Now came the patient work. Teams of laborers, using copper chisels and hard dolerite stone pounders, would begin to chip away at the high spots of the bedrock, slowly and carefully working their way down to the level marks. It was not loud, explosive work. It was a rhythmic chink, chink, chink of metal on stone, a sound that would have echoed across the plateau for months. They would leave a few natural rock formations in the middle to be incorporated into the core of the pyramid, saving time and effort. Once this immense area, over 13 acres, was leveled to within a fraction of an inch, the foundation was ready. A perfect, flat, sacred space carved from the living rock, waiting for the first stones to arrive. This initial act of leveling was a masterpiece of simple, elegant engineering, a quiet testament to their patience and precision.
Now, who were the people who performed this monumental labor? For centuries, the popular image has been one of thousands of slaves, driven by whips under a merciless sun. But the quiet story told by archaeology is very different and much more human. The pyramids were not built by slaves. They were built by Egyptians. Tens of thousands of them. Most were farmers. For 3 months every year, during a season called Akhet, the Nile would overflow its banks, flooding the farmland. This was a welcome, life-giving event that deposited a rich layer of fertile black silt. But during this time, there was no farm work to be done. So the pharaoh offered them another kind of work, a national project. It was seen as a form of taxation, yes, but also as a civic and religious duty. To work on the pharaoh's eternal home was to secure his place in the afterlife, which in turn ensured the continued stability and prosperity of the entire kingdom. It was an act of Mat, the Egyptian concept of cosmic order, harmony, and justice. And the pharaoh, in turn, cared for his workers. Near the Giza Plateau, archaeologists have uncovered the remains of a vast, bustling city. Not a temporary camp, but a well-organized town built to house the pyramid workers. It was called Gergit Khufu, or Khufu's settlement. Let's wander through the quiet streets of this town in our minds. It is early morning. The air is cool and still. We see long galleries, like barracks, where the rotating teams of workers slept on woven mats. But nearby, we also see houses for the more permanent, skilled craftsmen, the stonemasons, the carpenters, the tool makers. The smell of baking bread fills the air. In a massive, state-run bakery, we can see workers grinding emmer wheat and barley between heavy stones. They mix the flour with water and yeast, kneading the dough on long tables, shaping it into round loaves and conical pots. These are then baked in rows upon rows of clay ovens. Archaeologists have found the remains of these bakeries and the bread pots by the thousands. And next to the bakery is the brewery. Beer was a staple of the ancient Egyptian diet. It was thick, nutritious, and slightly sweet, more like a liquid food than the beer we know today. It was safer to drink than plain water and was part of the workers' daily wages. The state provided for its people. Records, carefully kept on papyrus, show that a worker's daily ration was generous. Several loaves of bread, a measure of beer, and a regular supply of onions and garlic, which were believed to promote strength and health. But that wasn't all. The evidence from the workers' village tells a story of a well-fed and cared-for workforce. Animal bones found in the rubbish heaps show that they didn't just eat bread and onions. They ate fish from the Nile, sheep, goats, and for the skilled craftsmen and overseers, a great deal of prime beef. Cattle were raised on special estates, brought to the site, and butchered in a dedicated facility. To eat beef regularly was a sign of wealth and importance in ancient Egypt. Its presence here shows that this was a high-priority, state-funded project. We can imagine the communal dining halls in the evening after a long day's work. The sun is setting, casting a warm orange glow over the plateau. The workers gather, talking quietly, sharing a meal. The air is filled with the murmur of conversation, the clatter of pottery, the smell of roasted fish and warm bread. It is a scene not of oppression, but of community. And what happened if a worker was injured? The village had its own medical facilities. Skeletons found in the workers' cemetery show evidence of healed bones. We see arms that were broken and then set properly, skulls that were trepanned for medical reasons, and even amputations where the patient survived long after the procedure. These people were not cast aside when they were hurt. They were treated by doctors, their bones were set in splints, and they were cared for until they recovered.
This is the care you give to valued citizens, not to disposable laborers. The workers were also organized. Graffiti left by the workers themselves inside the pyramid's hidden chambers tells us this. They were divided into crews with names like the Friends of Khufu Gang or the Drunkards of Menkaure. These were not the names of slaves, but of proud teams competing with each other, leaving their mark on history. It shows a sense of identity, of pride, and even of humor. So, let us put aside the old image of whips and chains. Instead, let us picture this: a farmer, his fields underwater, traveling to Giza. He lives for 3 months in a clean, organized town. He is given good food, good beer, and medical care. He works hard, yes, but he works with his friends and neighbors as part of a team. He is contributing to a project that he believes is essential for the balance of the cosmos. And then, when the waters of the Nile recede, he returns home to his farm and his family, ready to plant the seeds in the newly enriched soil. This was the rhythm of life, the rhythm of the pyramid's construction. Now, let us turn to the stones themselves, the very heart of the pyramid. The Great Pyramid of Khufu is made of an estimated 2.3 million stone blocks, each weighing an average of 2.5 tons, the weight of a large car. Where did they all come from? The vast majority of the blocks, the core stones that make up the bulk of the pyramid's interior, came from right there on the Giza Plateau. Just south of the great structure, you can still see the vast scooped-out area of the main quarry. Let's imagine ourselves in that quarry on a typical workday. It's not a scene of explosive chaos, but of patient, ingenious work. The limestone here is layered, like a great cake. The workers would first clear the top layer of sand and lesser quality stone. Then they would begin to carve out the blocks. They didn't have steel tools. Their chisels were made of copper, a relatively soft metal. But they had a secret weapon: knowledge. They knew the stone. They knew its weaknesses, its grain. To cut a channel, they would likely use harder stone tools, like dolerite pounders, to bash away at the rock. But for the finer cuts, copper was sufficient. And they had sand, a simple abrasive quartz sand. A copper saw on its own would be useless against limestone, but by feeding a constant stream of wet sand into the cut, the soft copper blade became a carrier for the hard, abrasive quartz grains. The sand did the real cutting. We can picture a team of 2 men working a long saw back and forth, a slow, rhythmic grinding sound. Another worker stands by, pouring water and sand into the groove from a small pot. Once the channels were cut on 3 sides of a block, how did they break it free from the bedrock below? Again, a simple, brilliant technique. They would carve a series of small holes along the base of the block. Then they would hammer in wooden wedges, and then they would pour water onto the wedges. Over several hours, the dry wood would slowly absorb the water, swelling with an incredible, silent force. This immense pressure, applied all along the base of the block, would be enough to crack the stone, splitting it cleanly from its bed. There was no loud bang, just a deep, satisfying groan as the stone gave way. A new block was born. not all the stone was from Giza. The pyramid we see today is a rough, tiered, sand-colored mountain, but it did not always look this way. When it was new, it was encased in a shell of highly polished, brilliant white limestone. It would have shone in the sun, a smooth, gleaming, dazzling sight, visible for miles. This special casing stone came from a place called Tura, across the Nile. The limestone at Tura was different. It was finer, purer, and whiter. The quarries here were not open-air pits, but deep underground galleries and caves, because the best stone was deep inside the hills. Imagine the Tura quarrymen. They worked in the cool, echoing darkness of the caves, their way lit by the flickering of oil lamps. The air would be cool and damp. The only sounds would be the tap-tap-tapping of their chisels and the murmur of their voices muffled by the stone. It would have been quiet, claustrophobic work, but they were elite craftsmen, quarrying the precious stone that would form the sacred skin of the pyramid. And there was another type of stone, even more special: granite. This incredibly hard, beautiful pink and black flecked stone was used for the most important structural parts of the pyramid's interior, the walls of the king's chamber and the massive sarcophagus in which the pharaoh's body would be laid to rest. This granite came from a place much, much farther away, Aswan, over 500 miles to the south. Quarrying granite was a different challenge altogether. Copper tools were useless against it. Instead, the workers used dolerite. Dolerite is a type of igneous rock, even harder than granite. They would find or shape large, heavy balls of dolerite, some weighing over 100 pounds. And then, with immense patience, they would pound the granite. A team of men would stand in a line and relentlessly, rhythmically pound the granite along the line they wanted to cut. Thump, 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 for hours, for days. They weren't chipping the granite away. They were pulverizing it, crushing it into dust, slowly creating a wide trench. It was grueling, repetitive work, but it was the only way. Once the trenches were deep enough, they would likely use the same fire and water technique or massive levers to break the great block free. Some of the granite beams inside the Great Pyramid weigh up to 80 tons, the weight of a dozen elephants. Freeing a single one of these from the bedrock was a monumental achievement in itself. And so we have our three types of stone: the strong core blocks from Giza, the beautiful white casing stones from the Tura caves, and the mighty granite from distant Aswan, each one patiently freed from the earth, ready for the next stage of its journey.
The next part of our story takes place on the water. The Nile was the highway of ancient Egypt. It was the source of life, and it was the primary means of transport. Moving millions of tons of stone would have been impossible without it. Let's first imagine the granite on its long journey from Aswan. After being freed from the quarry, the massive blocks, weighing many tons, had to be moved to the river's edge. This was likely done using wooden sledges, dragged by teams of men over a prepared trackway. At the river, they were loaded onto special barges. These were not small reed skiffs, but enormous vessels built of cedar wood, imported from Lebanon. We can picture one of these barges. It is long and wide, low in the water, built for stability and strength. The great block of granite rests in the center. Secure it with thick ropes of papyrus fiber. The journey from Aswan to Giza would have been slow and majestic. It would be timed to coincide with the annual flood. During the inundation, the Nile was wider, deeper, and the current was stronger, making it easier to transport such heavy loads downstream. A crew of sailors would guide the barge with long steering oars at the stern, keeping it in the main channel. They would travel by day, mooring at the riverbank at night.
Imagine the quiet nights on the Nile. The barge is tied to the shore. The great stone is a silent, dark shape in the moonlight. The crew sleeps on the deck under a blanket of brilliant stars, undisturbed by city lights. The only sounds are the gentle lapping of the water against the hull, the chirping of insects in the reeds, and perhaps the distant call of a night bird. It was a peaceful, timeless journey, lasting for weeks. The white limestone from Tura had a much shorter trip. The quarries were right by the river. The blocks would be loaded onto barges and simply ferried across the Nile to the Giza side. But how did they get the stones from the main river channel right to the foot of the pyramid? The Giza Plateau is some distance from the Nile. The answer, once again, lies in the genius of their water management. The Egyptians dug a series of canals leading from the Nile right up to the plateau. They constructed a man-made harbor, a bustling inland port, at the base of the construction site. During the flood season, this harbor would have been a hive of activity. Barges arriving from Aswan and Tura, boats carrying food supplies, tools, timber, and people. We can picture the scene. The water is teeming with vessels. Workers wade into the shallows to help guide the barges in. Overseers shout instructions from the quay. The air is filled with the sounds of creaking wood, splashing water, and human voices. But it is an organized activity, a steady flow. Barge after barge arrives, unloads its precious cargo, and then heads back for another. The continuous aquatic supply chain powered by the river's natural rhythm. Once a stone block was unloaded at the Giza harbor, it began the final overland leg of its journey to the pyramid itself. This is where the sheer human effort becomes most apparent. How did they move a 2.5-ton block, let alone an 80-ton one, across the sand? The answer is found in a beautiful painting from a later tomb, the tomb of Jethu-Hotep. It shows a colossal statue being moved by workers, and it reveals the secret. The block would be placed on a large, sturdy wooden sledge. Thick ropes were tied to the front of the sledge, and long lines of workers would take up the ropes, ready to pull. But pulling a heavy sledge over dry sand is nearly impossible. The sand piles up in front, creating immense friction. The painting shows a man standing at the front of the sledge, pouring a liquid from a small jar onto the sand in its path. For years, people thought this was a ritual offering, but physics gives us a better answer. He is pouring water. Experiments have shown that the right amount of water, not too little, not too much, on sand makes it firm and reduces the friction by half. The effort required to pull the sledge is dramatically lessened. So let's picture a team. 100 men, perhaps more, stand in 2 long lines holding the thick ropes. An overseer stands to one side, holding a clapstick or a drum. He begins a steady rhythm. Clap, clap, clap. And the men begin to pull all together in perfect time. They might chant, a low, rhythmic work song that echoes across the sand. Ho, heave, ho, heave. At the front of the sledge, a worker walks backwards, carefully pouring just the right amount of water from his jar. The sand darkens and firms up. The sledge begins to move, slowly, steadily, inch by inch, foot by foot, gliding over the damp sand. It is a picture of cooperation, of rhythm, and of simple, profound ingenuity. The power of 100 men focused into a single, coordinated effort. They are not straining against each other, they are a single machine, a human engine, moving a piece of a mountain.
So the stones have arrived at the base. The foundation is level. Now the pyramid must rise. And this presents the next great challenge: how to lift the stones, not just a few feet, but hundreds of feet into the air. The answer is a ramp. But what kind of ramp? This is one of the few areas where Egyptologists still have gentle debates, as the evidence is not conclusive. The pyramid itself consumed its own construction ramp, leaving few traces behind. But we can explore the most likely ideas. One idea is a long, straight ramp leading from the ground directly up to the height of the current working level. As the pyramid grew taller, the ramp would have to grow longer and taller too, to keep the slope manageable. The problem with this idea is that by the time the pyramid was near its peak, the ramp would have been over a mile long, containing more material and requiring more labor than the pyramid itself. It seems inefficient. Another, more plausible idea is a spiral ramp or a contour ramp. Imagine a roadway that corkscrews around the outside of the pyramid as it goes up. This would keep the ramp shorter and would use the body of the pyramid itself for support. We can picture the sledges being pulled up this winding road, a slow, spiraling ascent. Corners would be a challenge, perhaps requiring them to pivot the sledges on special platforms, but it is an elegant solution. Third, more recent theory suggests an internal ramp. In this scenario, the outer part of the pyramid was built first, including the smooth casing stones. A wide ramp would then have been built inside the pyramid's core, spiraling upwards within the structure itself. The blocks would be hauled up this internal tunnel and then maneuvered into place from the inside. This would explain the lack of any evidence for a massive external ramp. It's a fascinating idea, a secret within the construction itself. Perhaps it was a combination of these ideas: a wider, lower ramp to get the heavy construction started, and then a more nimble spiral or internal ramp for the upper levels. We don't need to solve the puzzle tonight. We can simply appreciate the problem and the quiet ingenuity of the people who solved it. Whichever method they used, the ramp itself was a major construction project. It would have been made of limestone chips, rubble, and tafla, a type of clay, packed hard and possibly reinforced with wooden beams. Its surface would be made smooth to allow the sledges to glide. Building and maintaining this ramp was a constant, ongoing task, rising alongside the pyramid it served.
And so the work begins, layer by layer, course by course. Let's imagine the first course of stones being laid upon the perfectly leveled bedrock. This was perhaps the most important layer of all. It had to be perfect. The stones, each weighing several tons, are maneuvered into place using levers, long, strong wooden poles. Men with crowbars would nudge the block, shifting it a fraction of an inch at a time. An overseer, a master mason, would be checking the alignment, the fit. The joints between the core stones were not meant to be perfect. Small gaps were filled with a gypsum mortar, more to lubricate the movement of the stones than to bind them, but the fit was still remarkably good. Once the first layer was complete, a vast, solid stone platform, they would begin the second. The sledges would be pulled up the ramp to the height of the first layer, the blocks unloaded, and the process would repeat. Slowly, patiently, the pyramid began to grow. The work had a rhythm. It was a city of labor, operating day in and day out for 20 years or more. We can imagine the sounds, not a deafening roar, but a constant low-level hum of activity, the rhythmic chanting of the pulling teams, the scrape of sledges on the ramp,
the dull thud of levers, the shouts of overseers calling out measurements, and the constant chink, chink, chink of the masons doing the final trimming and fitting of a block right on the spot. As the pyramid grew higher, the view for the workers would have changed. At first, they saw the workers' village, the harbor, the green line of the Nile Valley. But as they climbed higher, 100 feet, 200 feet, 300 feet, their world expanded. They could see for miles in every direction. They could see the great capital city of Memphis in the distance. They could see the endless desert stretching away to the west. They were working closer to the sun, closer to their gods. There must have been a sense of awe working at such a height, building a stairway to the heavens. The skilled masons were the true artists of the project. As the core blocks were set, another team would be working on the outside, placing the beautiful white Tura limestone casing blocks. These were laid with breathtaking precision. The joints between them were so fine that you could not slip a piece of papyrus between them. They were angled perfectly, and their outer face was polished to a brilliant shine. This was work of the highest quality, performed by the best craftsmen in the kingdom.
While the great bulk of the pyramid was rising, another more intricate task was happening deep within its heart: the construction of the internal passages and chambers. These were not dug out after the pyramid was built. They were built into the structure as it grew. The builders had to know exactly where each passage and chamber would be, planning course by course. Let's descend in our minds into the pyramid while it is still under construction. We enter through the main descending passage, a narrow corridor just a few feet high, sloping down into the bedrock. It's dark and cool. At a certain point, a new passage begins, ascending up into the body of the pyramid. This ascending passage is also narrow and cramped. We follow it upwards until it opens into one of the most remarkable spaces in all of ancient architecture, the Grand Gallery. It is a long, high corridor. Its ceiling soars nearly 30 feet above its floor. The walls are made of beautifully polished limestone, corbelled inwards. This means each layer of stone juts out slightly farther than the one below it, creating a magnificent, soaring effect. It is an architectural masterpiece hidden deep inside a mountain of stone. At the top of the Grand Gallery lies the heart of the pyramid, the King's Chamber. As we enter, the stone changes. The walls are no longer pale limestone. They are the hard pink speckled granite from Aswan. The room is a perfect rectangle, severe and simple. The walls are smooth, the joints perfect. And in the center of the room sits the sarcophagus. It too is carved from a single massive block of granite. It is slightly larger than the entrance to the chamber, which means it must have been placed in the room as the pyramid was being built around it. It has been sitting here, in the dark, for 4,500 years, waiting. Above the King's Chamber is one of the pyramid's greatest engineering secrets. 5 small relieving chambers, built one on top of the other. They're not meant to be entered. They are rough, unfinished, and were never seen again after they were built. Their purpose was to relieve the immense pressure of the millions of tons of stone above, to prevent the roof of the King's Chamber from being crushed. It was on the walls of these hidden chambers that the workers left their graffiti, the names of their gangs, a quiet personal message left for eternity. And from the King's Chamber and the Queen's Chamber below it, 2 narrow shafts, only a few inches wide, slope upwards and outwards through the body of the pyramid. For a long time, they were thought to be air shafts, but they are not for air. They are for the soul. They were precisely aligned with certain stars,
stars in the northern and southern sky that held special significance for the Egyptians. These were the star shafts, conduits for the pharaoh's Ka, allowing his spirit to journey out from his tomb to travel among the star gods in the night sky.
For 20 years, the work continued, layer after layer. Slowly, the pyramid neared its final tapering point. The last few blocks would have been incredibly difficult to place. And then, finally, came the last stone of all, the capstone. The Egyptians called it the pyramidion. This was not an ordinary block. It was a miniature pyramid in itself, perfectly shaped. It may have been made of granite or fine limestone, and it's believed that it was covered or gilded in a layer of electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver, or pure gold. Imagine the day the pyramidion was set in place. All the workers would have stopped their tasks. They would have gathered at the base of the pyramid or on the surrounding plateau, looking up. The high priests would perform the final consecrating rituals, and then, with immense care, using a system of levers and ropes, the final stone would be maneuvered into place, completing the great structure. As it settled, the sun would catch its gilded surface. A brilliant flash of light from the very apex of the pyramid, a man-made star 480 feet above the desert floor. The work was not quite done. The long construction ramp now had to be dismantled. As it was taken down from top to bottom, the final polishing of the white casing stones would be completed. As the ramp disappeared, it would reveal, for the first time, the finished pyramid in all its glory. A perfect, smooth, gleaming white mountain, capped with gold, shining so brightly under the Egyptian sun that it would have been almost blinding to look at. A truly divine object descended to earth. The project was complete. The pharaoh's stairway to heaven was ready. The great national project would wind down. The temporary workers, the farmers, would have long since returned to their fields, their lives governed by the rhythm of the Nile. The skilled craftsmen, the masons, the carpenters, the tool makers, would move on to the next great project, perhaps another pyramid for the next pharaoh, or a temple or a tomb in the Valley of the Kings. The workers' village of Gerjet Khufu would slowly empty out, its streets growing quiet, its bakeries going cold. The dust of the desert would begin to reclaim it.
And so, we leave the Giza Plateau as dusk begins to fall. The sun, the god Ra, sinks towards the western horizon, the land of the afterlife. The pyramid, which shone so brightly during the day, now begins to change its character. The brilliant white limestone takes on the soft, warm colors of the sunset, pink and orange and purple. The shadows lengthen. The air grows cool. A profound quiet settles over the desert. We can imagine the spirit of the pharaoh resting deep within the granite sarcophagus in the silent, dark heart of his stone mountain. His journey is over, and his eternal life has begun. The pyramid is no longer a construction site. It is no longer a place of work and noise. It has fulfilled its purpose. It is now a silent sentinel, a guardian of a sacred sleep.
And as the last light of the sun fades, the first stars begin to appear in the deep velvet sky. The star shafts, aligned so perfectly, now point to their celestial destinations, pathways for the soul. The pyramid, once a symbol of the sun, now becomes a companion to the stars, connecting the earth below with the heavens above. It stands, through the quiet of the night, a timeless shape against the star-dusted sky, a monument to patience, to community, and to a belief in eternity. And just as the pyramid now rests, silent and still, it is time for you too to rest. There is nothing more to think about, nothing more to figure out. The story is told, the work is done. All that is left is to sink deeper and deeper into comfort and peace. Let your breathing be slow and steady, like the gentle rhythm of the Nile. Let your body be heavy and still, like a stone resting peacefully in the desert sand. Let your mind be clear and calm, like the vast starry night sky. The logistics are complete. The pyramid is at peace, and you can be at peace too. It is time to sleep now, to drift away on the quiet currents of the night. Sleep well. Rest deeply. Sleep.